Course.
Well, good morning, everyone. Please open your New Testaments to the Gospel of John and chapter 10. And while you're turning there, let me add my welcome to all of you who are visiting with us this morning, and as well as those of you who are here and those who are streaming. You can tell it's summertime, and we're blessed by a lot of those who are traveling, and we're so encouraged by your presence and delighted that you've chosen to be with us this morning. We began a series of lessons several months ago. I do these once a month on the extraordinary I am statements of Jesus found in this gospel. There are 7 of them that John mentions. And of course, that I am statement takes us back to Exodus, the 3rd chapter, at the burning bush, when Moses asked God, "Who shall I say sent me to free them?" And God simply said, "I am that I am. Tell them I am sent you. I am Yahweh." And John's record of, or the writer of this gospel's purpose, is intended to bring us to faith in Christ. He's wrote at the end about chapter 20 and verses 30 and 31 that Jesus did a lot of other things that aren't written in this gospel. But these that he chose, these miracles, these teachings, were written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. So far in this series, we've covered 3 I ams. I am the light of the world. I am the bread of life. And last month, we looked at I am the gate. And this is the fourth lesson, and it also comes from John 10. Jesus is going to transition from I am the gate to this particular teaching in John chapter 10, verses 11 through 21, and that is that I am the good shepherd. So let's go ahead and read that, starting in verse 11 of John 10 and reading down through verse 21. Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep, so when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I have received from my Father." At these words, the Jews were divided. Many of them said, "He's demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him?" But others said, "These are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" As we said in all of these I am statements and other things of teachings of Jesus, Jesus, when he speaks, doesn't just speak randomly. He doesn't just something pop into his head that he says out. There's always a purpose. There's always a background. There's a goal that he has in mind. And the difficulty that we have oftentimes when we're looking at a text like this is that we will pull out, "I am a good shepherd," and then ignore the context and not really get the full meaning of what he's trying to teach. Last month, we looked at the near context and the far context of Jesus' teaching here. And so I'm not going to repeat all of that now. If you want to listen to it, it's available on YouTube, or you can ask for a CD of that lesson. Just as I am the gate was probably one of the least studied I am statements, I believe that I am the good shepherd is probably one of the the most studied. And as you saw from the song service, we sing a lot about that. And so that was a great foundation. Thank you, Tim, for that. You can keep your Bibles open here to John 10. Any other passages I'm going to refer to will be on the screen, with the exception of the last one. And I'll ask you to turn there with me at the end of our lesson. So let's begin by pointing out the fact that sheep need a shepherd. I have talked a lot in the past. In fact, I taught this lesson, I am the good shepherd, not this lesson, but a different one, up when I was up at camp. And I spoke there about how dumb sheep are. And I've talked a lot about the low IQ of sheep. I wanted to be politically correct and not call them dumb, just say they don't have much of an IQ. But in the process of preparing this sermon this week, I am rethinking that generalization. In fact, my whole worldview about sheep has changed in the last week. When I was thinking about this whole series, and I was thinking, okay, when I get to the Good Shepherd, I need to figure out a way to put up on screen a video of how stupid sheep are. Listen, if you get on Google and say dumb sheep and put video in, you'll get a bunch of them. Of sheep being rescued out of a ditch and running and falling right back in the ditch again. Or the fact that they get on their backs, certain gastric acids in their stomachs come to the front and they can't turn over and they'll die there. If somebody doesn't come, a shepherd, come and turn them back over again. It's true that sheep have their eyes on the side. They can't see very far in front of themselves. Robin, in her help for me this week, brought me home a book from the library called Sheepology. And sheep actually have like almost 300 degrees of vision. They just can't see right in front of them. Their irises are sideways, so they have this ability to see danger from here to here. They just can't see what's right in front of their noses. And so they can't swim. I mean, there's all kinds of things we could talk about sheep that are, they're deficient. And let me just say at the outset here, and I'm going to bring this up many times, that's not the message God's giving us about sheep here. Either sheep in real life or you and I as sheep. And so instead, I want us to look at sheep as being dependent. Not stupid, but dependent. Because when we think of sheep as dumb, their dependence on the shepherd is not something positive. Well, yeah, you got to have a shepherd. Look how stupid you are. I mean, and so that's not a positive thing. It's negative. And as sheep, we don't want that. We don't want that to be our attitude either. Because our thinking is, well, if sheep were smart, they wouldn't need a shepherd. And so we look at ourselves as sheep and we think, well, I'm smart. And so I don't need a shepherd. And that's the problem. We love independence. We love being in charge and making our own decisions. And we hate it when we lose our independence. And God is trying to tell us, you are never independent. You are always dependent on Him. So God created sheep with a purpose. And a purpose beyond what we could obviously see, that there's all that wool, so we have clothing, there's the meat on the sheep, there's milk that the ewes produce that we can drink as a food source. I think the added purpose of God in using this illustration and creating sheep in the first place is to show us what true dependence looks like, and to show us what the value of a good shepherd is to us. So the dependence of sheep here in John 10 is not a shortcoming. In fact, it's a glorious thing. It's a source of blessing for us. It's an example of faith. It's an example of loyalty. And the reason for that is because dependence is not a shortcoming. Dependence speaks to relationship. I just let that sink in. Dependence emphasizes relationship. again, it speaks to the ability, the power, the goodness of the shepherd. Of the shepherd and the sheep under their care, which kind of takes me back to the near context. You notice in John chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. This is what the Jews are referring to at the very end of our text. The person who's demon-possessed can't heal the blind. As they came along, the disciples saw this man born blind, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus' response to that was, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. And in the same way, God uses sheep and uses us as sheep to highlight and display the power of the Good Shepherd, the importance of the Good Shepherd, so that we will recognize how great that is. So he created sheep to make a point. And again, it's not about intelligence. And I will tell you, it's great to be a sheep under God's watchful care. So I think about the natural world out there, and I see sheep out there, and they're being taken care of. And I can't you just picture the wild animals, the coyotes and others looking at, and just, boy, I'm glad I don't have to have somebody over me. I'm free. I can do what I want, and I can go where I want. And I think that's true of human sheep too. Everyone's, nobody's going to tell me what to do. But surely a coyote looks at the sheep with the shepherd and says, man, they got it made. They're led to where food is and water, and they're protected, and they don't have to worry about dangers. That's the aspect of sheep I want to talk about this morning. So Jesus mentions two kinds of shepherds this morning, or people who care for sheep. First, there's the hireling. My translation has the hired hand. Listen, the hired hand doesn't care anything about the sheep. They are only in it for what the sheep can give to them, whether it's a wage that they're earning because they're out there watching the sheep, or the physical things that they can get from the sheep, the wool and the meat and the milk. The problem with the hired hand is if danger, Jesus says, arises, or if too much is required of them in watching the sheep, they abandon the sheep. They flee. They leave the sheep to whatever needs that they only have for themselves. And then there is the Good Shepherd. And the Good Shepherd is identified as one who will lay his down for the sheep. And so we say, well, why does he do that? He lays his own life down, Jesus said. He did it voluntarily. Well, why? Well, the reason is because he loves the sheep. He knows his sheep. And again, that speaks of relationship, not intelligence. And as we look at how it carries itself out, the Jewish rulers are the hirelings. They're the hired hands here. You can see that in their reaction to what Jesus said in verse 20 when he says, I lay down my sheep, my life for the sheep, etc. When they say, he's demon-possessed, he's raving mad. Why listen to him? Well, again, the reason they say that is they can't imagine doing that. Why would I do that? That's not who they are. That's not what they're made of. Why would anybody listen to Jesus? Because he's obviously demon-possessed and raving mad. And all the time, Jesus' credential is standing there right next to him, which was the man who was born blind who's now seeing. The hired hands have been living off the sheep for years and not caring one bit about them. Jesus, as he states very clearly, is the Good Shepherd. Listen, he's the only one who fits this description of the Good Shepherd. He is the only one who fits this definition. Remember in Luke, the 18th chapter, when the rich young ruler came up to Jesus and said, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus' response in verse 19 is, why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. And yet right here, Jesus is calling himself the Good Shepherd. And he prefaced that with, I am the Good Shepherd. No one is good but God. I am Yahweh, the Lord. The Lord is the Good Shepherd, which is what he is. And again, there's no doubt about Jesus' credentials. Even from our standpoint, what did we just memorialize? We just remembered that our Good Shepherd laid down his life for us. He laid it down of his own will, and he took it again, and is at the right hand of God now. So let's talk about us as sheep in the context of the Good Shepherd. From what I can read in this text, and I'm going to go back a little bit earlier from our study last week, the first thing I want you to point out to you is seeing Jesus is not important. Seeing Jesus is not important. Jesus did not say the sheep know him on sight. Notice what he said in verse 3. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls out his own sheep by name and leads them out. I think you need to be impressed that your shepherd knows you and knows you by name. I don't know how many of you have been around sheep. Can you tell those guys apart? Do you recognize what sheep is which one? They all look alike to me. But God knows you. Jesus knows you and your face. In verses 4 and 5, it says, when he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his voice follow him because they can see him. Is that what it says? No, it's because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Hearing, listening, that's what's important. Hearing the shepherd. Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 8, though you have not seen him, you love him. Even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with inexpressible and glorious joy. I don't see Jesus. I can't see him, but I believe in him, and the reason I believe in him is because I've heard him. I've heard his voice. I've heard his words. I've heard his gospel. I've heard his message. Faith comes by not seeing, but by hearing. Even the other sheep. I have other sheep, he said in our text, that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. So in the realm of sensory awareness, listening is more than seeing. I mean, we have an expression in our culture, seeing is believing. In God's world, listening is believing. The second thing I want us to point out is that sheep do not do well alone. As sheep, we kind of tend to wander off for whatever reason. There could be a lot of reasons. Sometimes people get offended and they wander off. Sometimes we get, and more often than not, we get busy with other things. Our schedules get so crowded that Jesus kind of gets pushed out. And I understand that not every week that we come together here is the best week ever. Sometimes life in general gets boring. Sometimes Bible classes that we have are either too challenging for us or they put us to sleep. And services don't always light a fire under you and get you really all hyped up. Listen, the place to stay is with the flock. The place to stay is in hearing distance of the shepherd. Because when you wander off, you're in danger. If you stay, you're safe. If you get to a point where you can't hear the shepherd's voice anymore, or you get lost from the safety of the flock, the consequence is often that you're going to fall. You're going to find yourself in a predicament that you can't get out of. And listen, while it's true, and people, maybe think about this, I can always come back to the Lord. Yeah, maybe. And because we have a good shepherd, he's going to come after you. Yes. if he can get to you before something dire happens? Wouldn't it be better just to stick around? Just to stay with the flock and stay under the care of the shepherd rather than going off and thinking you can always come back later? Wouldn't it be better just to maintain your faithfulness all along? The third thing is, Jesus didn't say, "My clever foxes hear my voice." Jesus is talking about a shepherd and his sheep. And our success does not reside alone in our ability or our skill to hear. Now, obviously, I just said hearing is important, listening is important. But my success doesn't depend solely on my ability to hear. In fact, it's weighted more heavily on Jesus' ability to lead. I don't have to understand everything Jesus said. I don't have to understand why he wants me to do this, or why he wants me to go there, or why he wants me to keep away from that. I just need to trust him. And I just need to follow in his footsteps, wherever that is. Listen, he's always going to take me where I need to be. He's always going to provide me what I need. So the question often comes from people, well, why should I do that? Why should I submit to the Lord? Why should I give up my independence and make myself dependent on him? Oh, those are good questions. And they deserve good answer. And the reason that we need to do that is because he's a good shepherd. He's a good shepherd. Notice in Hebrews, the 4th chapter, in verse 15, we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. He knows our weaknesses. He knows our needs. And the reason I know that he knows that, because he became a sheep. Our good shepherd was a sheep. And he walked in our walk, and he was tempted with our temptations. But he didn't wander off. Going a little earlier in Hebrews chapter 2, verses 17 and 18, for this reason he had to be made like them, fully sheep, if I can change that, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people, because he himself suffered when he was tempted. He's able to help those who are being tempted. Listen, he has walked in our cloven hooves as a sheep, so that he could become the good shepherd, so we could know the difficulties that we have. And listen, when we talk about him being the good shepherd, it's because he was the best at living in this world as a sheep. We sang about it already this morning. He was the Lamb of God. He lived the life of a sheep better than anybody has ever lived the life of a sheep. You and I, on the other hand, are not so good at being sheep. In fact, let's just be plain about it. We're bad as sheep. And I think that we all realize that we're sinful. And just let me say this. You're so much worse than what you know. You're not just bad, you're really bad. I'm really bad. And I think that if God allowed us to see just how bad we really are, we just all shrivel up. And it's God's mercy, it's God's kindness to just kind of open ourselves up to ourselves a little at a time. Because it's not our goodness that makes us his sheep. It's his overwhelming goodness and love and mercy and kindness. And I think if we get an inkling of both of those, if we get just an inkling of how good that good shepherd is, and just an inkling of how bad we are, and how much we need the good shepherd, we'd all run to him as quickly as we could. And listen, submitting to him, submitting to being his sheep and allowing him to be our shepherd takes all the pressure off of us. Listen, again, we're sheep. We can hardly see. We need someone to guide us. We need someone to direct us. We are dependent by nature, and he's calling us to be a part of his flock, volunteering to be our shepherd and to make us a part of his sheepfold. And we just need to decide to follow our good shepherd, Jesus Christ. You know, some people say they can't hear God. That God's not speaking to them, or he's not answering my prayers. He's not answering my questions. He's too far away. Well, at least for that latter part, I know that's not true, because Paul said in Acts 17, God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. Listen, this is not God. He's not playing hide and seek with us. I think he's over there, and you run, and then he hides again, and you can't find him. That's not God. You think about the parable of the prodigal son in Luke the 15th chapter. After the prodigal's gone away, wasted his money, and a famine came, and nobody's helping him. He finally, while he's eating food that was given to the pigs, comes to his mouth himself and decides he's going to go home. Verse 20. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Not only is God not playing hide and seek, if you'll take just a couple of steps toward him, he will run to you. He wants to find you. He wants you to be a part of his flock. Now, with regard to those other things that people have, you know, he's not answering my questions, he's not answering my prayers. It may be that your questions and your requests aren't the most important thing that you need. I mean, they may seem important to us, like, well, should I marry this person? Is this the right career for me? Should I move to this place? What should I do when I retire? These are questions that are in the forefronts of our minds. And they may seem to be important to us at the time. But listen, getting answers and having those requests fulfilled are not the reason for us to become a child of God. You do not become a Christian so that God will bless you with the things that you're asking for or wanting. That kind of seems selfish, doesn't it? If I become a Christian so God will make my life easier or answer all my questions. Perhaps what's more important is living a life that glorifies him. And let me tell you, nothing glorifies God more. Nothing places him in the eyes of the world any higher than for them to see him as the good shepherd. And consequently, nothing glorifies God more than being a sheep that's dependent on him and faithful to him. Here's the passage I want us to turn to together, Psalm 23. And we already sang it, kind of. I'm going to change it just a little bit at the beginning. But let's read it together. The Lord, Yahweh, the great I am, is my good shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You have Jesus as your good shepherd, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and I promise you we all will if the Lord doesn't come first. You can go with him without fear. Even when evil is all around you, you're protected. Even when you're in the presence of your enemies, it's okay. This psalm is the height. That's why we have, I think, 3 or 4 songs in our songbook that's based on this psalm. This psalm is the height of glorifying God. And it's written by a person who views himself as a sheep. Not as the king that he actually was, not as the great conqueror that he was, but as a sheep. And so I just want to ask you, are you willing to be a sheep? To make yourself totally dependent on the shepherd? To rely on him for your guidance, to rely on him for your provision, to be counted among those of his flock and remain faithful to him, and to be content in the flock of God and not go wandering off after this, that, or the other. His sheep hear his voice. And let me tell you, there is a myriad of voices out there calling you to come follow them. Listen to me. Listen to this. Listen to that. They're all strangers. They're all pretenders. There's only one good shepherd. And he's calling you to follow him. If we can help you with that, please come forward while we stand and sing.